1995 was a major year for WCW as it added Nitro to the schedule, directly opposing WWF Raw and kicking off the Monday Night Wars. With that came an aggressive recruitment drive from Eric Bischoff, who brought in some of the top in-ring talent from around the world to provide excitement on his new show, as well as some major established stars and steals from the competition. All of that didn't really happen until September, mind, and the rest of the year leading up to it wasn't exactly a feast of cutting-edge professional wrestling. Rewatching the promotion's 9 order-only super shows really does lay bare the good, the bad, and the insane from a topsy-turvy 12 months in the place where the big boys play. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is every WCW pay-per-view of 1995 ranked from worst to best. Join us! Number 9, Uncensored. The inaugural WCW Uncensored began a March tradition of the company putting out some of the absolute worst professional wrestling shows you've ever seen. With bizarre storylines, puzzling booking, and an almost total absence of decent in-ring action, Uncensored 95 is a show you should avoid at all costs, unless your priest suggests you watch it as penance for some particularly serious sin. The show kicked off with a pre-taped King of the Road match between Dustin Rhodes and the Blacktop Bully. What is a King of the Road match? I'm not glad you asked. Taking place on the back of a moving truck, the general idea was to get from one end to the other and then blow a horn. Badly filmed and with almost nothing of note happening, this interminable experiment finally ended after 15 long minutes, which must have just been thrilling for the live crowd in the arena. As an interesting side note, both Dustin and Bully bladed, which was against WCW policy at the time and was subsequently fired. Imagine getting fired over this match. Things didn't exactly get much better in bout number 2, a martial arts match between Meng and Jim Duggan. Slow, uneventful, and taking place in front of a crowd that had been killed by having to watch the previous bout, this was rotten on just about every level. The only logical way to follow up a martial arts match is with a bastardized boxer versus wrestler match, of course, because that's what we're all paying to see on a professional wrestling pay-per-view. Johnny B. Bad and Arn Anderson didn't have much to work with, but this still fell well below rock bottom expectations. An hour into the broadcast, we got an actual wrestling match, hooray, as Randy Savage took on Avalanche, John Earthquake Tenter's gimmick of the week. It was just about alright, but then managed to pee me right off by ending in a disqualification. Did I mention it was a no DQ match? Because it was! Okay, deep breath and move on to Sting versus Big Bubba Rogers, another humdrum affair that should have been much better. As to should have been the Texas Tornado Rules Falls Count Anywhere tag scrap between Harlem Heat and the Nasty Boys. And then the leather strap match, alleged main event between Hulk Hogan and Vader. To set the tone, the Hulkster unleashed his ultimate surprise before the bell rung, which turned out not to be the Ultimate Warrior, as WCW had been heavily implying in the build-up, but rather the Renegade, some random bloke who bore an ever so slight resemblance to Jim Hellwig's alter ego. And then the bell rang and we had a match. A crap match. Oh, and then there was the finish, which saw some run-ins from masked men revealed to be Randy Savage and Arn Anderson as Hogan tied Ric Flair to the strap and touched all 4 corners to somehow win the whole bastardized thing. I concede that Uncensored was a good name for a wrestling pay-per-view, but I really feel like Brain Dead would have been a much more apt title for this mess. Number 8, Halloween Havoc. And if you thought the end to the Uncensored main event was completely asinine, and it was, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, brother! To start with, the actual in-ring match between Hogan and the Giant was preceded by a sumo monster truck match, which was filmed the day before. Yep, a sumo monster truck match. Taking place on the roof of nearby Cobo Hall, it ended with the 7-footer presumably falling off the side of the building to his death. But don't worry, because he was able to saunter out into the arena not too long afterwards with nary a scratch on him. Better still, he managed to win the WCW title from the Hulkster when Jimmy Hart turned on his man, causing a DQ. How did this give the Giant the title, you ask? Because Jimmy Hart had inserted a clause into the match contract that stipulated the belt could change hands due to a disqualification. It didn't stand, with WCW stripping the Giant of the title 8 days later on Nitro. As for the match, total and utter bollocks. To be fair, it was Paul White's first match ever, and he did what he could do, but what he could do was very little. Also, I haven't even mentioned the Yeti! Really, need I say more? The The show started off promisingly enough, with Johnny B. Bad beating Diamond Dallas Page in a decent, if not overly long bout to bag the WCW television title. That was followed with Randy Savage squashing the Zodiac, which I'm fine with, before Kurosawa beat Road Warrior Hawk in a rather clunky match. Sabu's victory over Mr. JL was short but entertaining, while Lex Luger's bout with Meng felt laboured and ended in an unsatisfactory DQ. As did the tag match between Ric Flair and Sting and Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman. In this instance, however, the match itself was absolutely fantastic, far and away the best thing on the show, and the finish, which saw Flair accept the hot tag and then immediately turn on his new partner, was expertly done. Pulling double duty, Randy Savage and Lex Luger had a disappointing match, which was sandwiched between the Hogan Giant nonsense. Number 7, Super Brawl. Super Brawl 5 was the end of the line for Paul Roma, the former Horseman, somehow, who put in such an unprofessional performance in the show's opener with Alex Wright, they basically signed off on his retirement from Major League Pro Wrestling. Roma just ate him up out there and even had the gall to kick out of the finish at 2.5 seconds in some pitiful attempt to make himself look good. Spoiler, he did not succeed in his mission to make himself look good. Also not looking good were Jim Duggan and Bunkhouse Buck, who had a horrible 12-minute match. Seriously, 12 minutes of Duggan and Buck. Someone greenlit that, you know? Kayfabe brothers Kevin and Dave, formerly Evad Sullivan, made it 3 stinkers in a row. And you know what? Why not make it 4 for 4? Thank you very much, Harlem Heat and the Nasty Boys, for boring the pants off me for 17 minutes, and thank you, WCW, for booking another title match on pay-per-view to end in a disqualification. The pants stay off for match number 5 as the Blacktop Bully beat Dustin Rhodes. Best thing I can say about this match is at least it didn't take place on the back of a moving truck. You can put your pants back on for the semi-main, and you really should, you pervert. A perfectly decent tag match between the teams of Randy Savage and Sting and Avalanche and Big Bubba Rogers. By no means a masterpiece or anything, it was a breezy, formulaic sports entertainment showcase and easily the highlight of this wretched broadcast. And in the main event, the WCW World Title match between Hulk Hogan and Vader went to a DQ. Which is a shame, really, because the bulk of the action was rather engaging. But hey, politics gonna politic, and the Orange Goblin must never show a sign of weakness, so we move on. Number 6, Bash at the Beach. So we move on to another meeting between the Hulkster and the Mastodon. This time though, it's in a cage. On the beach. This was by-the-numbers stuff, the sort of thing you saw Hogan do a million times during his WWF golden period, as he managed to survive the monster and leave with the gold still wrapped around his waist. At least the setting was nice and made for an interesting visual experience, even if WCW's claims of, 50 to 100,000 people in attendance were more inflated than Hogan's ego. In the opener, Sting retained his US title against Meng in the classic Sting takes a kicking from a big lad and then makes a fiery comeback match. He knew how to do that as well as anyone, didn't he? The suck set in with the Renegade's successful TV title defense against Paul Orndorff, who may have been Mr. Wonderful, but he wasn't Mr. Miracle Worker, and the match blew a fat one. As did Kamala's victory over Jim Duggan, a match that would have been more appropriate for a pay-per-view in 1985, not 1995. Harlem Heat retained the tag straps in a 3-team bout with the Nasty Boys and the Blue Bloods. They were trying for something out there, but it was a bit of a mess overall. And Randy Savage pinned Ric Flair to win their predictably entertaining Lifeguard aka Lumberjack match. You've seen the Nature Boy and the Macho Man wrestle 1,000 times, I'm sure, but trust me, one more won't hurt you. Number 5, Slamboree. It's a WCW pay-per-view in 1995, so you can bet your booty we've got a match between the Nasty Boys and Harlem Heat for ya. To be fair, even though you'll get sick to death of watching them wrestle each other if you're as dumb as I am and decide to revisit every WCW pay-per-view from this year, their outing here wasn't all bad and the crowd were into it the whole way. Which is more than could be said about the match between Kevin Sullivan and the Man with No Name, a bad bit of business that the Florida faithful couldn't give a toss about. Kinda hard to blame them, isn't it? Because it's Slamboree, there were various legends in attendance, several of whom were inducted into WCW's Hall of Fame on the night. One of the inductees, Wahoo McDaniel, got an undercard win against Dick Murdoch in a match WCW decided to air in black and white. Basically, it was two old lads smacking each other about for 6 minutes, so nothing you can't see down the social club on a Saturday night. On paper, an IWGP heavyweight title bout between the Great Muta and Paul Orndorff sounds just dandy. Unfortunately, Mr. Wonderful and the Mistmaster just never quite clicked, and they lost the crowd with a match that dragged. Also dragging was the veteran versus rookie confrontation between Arn Anderson and Alex Wright. It told a decent enough story, but the leisurely pace led to lulls and hurt the match's heat. You cannot accuse the Hoss throwdown between Meng and Hawk of outstaying its welcome. You also cannot really accuse it of being very good or having a satisfactory finish either. In the semi-main, Sting beats Big Bubba in a lights out aka unsanctioned match. A solid shift from Borden and Trailer here. And in the main event, the Monster Maniacs duo of Hogan and Savage beat Flair and Vader in a match that had its moments and certainly had plenty of star power. Number 4, World War III. World War III was going along just fine until the main event. WCW's decision to host a 60-man 3-ring battle royal for the vacant WCW World title was, well, it was the sort of thing WCW would do, wasn't it? Rather than some awesome spectacle, it was a complete cluster bastard that was filled with jobbers, went on forever, and ended abruptly. Hey, at least the Macho Man walked away the winner, eh? As I said, before that, things were going just fine. The dependable DDP and Johnny B. Bad opened in style, with Page retaining the TV title. Big Bubba beat Jim Duggan in a taped fist match. They certainly used those taped fists in a brawl that was predominantly punches. Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto beat Mayumi Ozaki and Cutie Suzuki in a really strong tag match that gave Western viewers a taste of what women's wrestling was like in the Far East. Kensuke Sasaki retained his US title in a suitably surly strong style match with Chris Benoit. The crowd weren't too into it, but you can't fault the work. Luger then beat Savage by submission in a rushed match before Sting beat Flair by submission in their customarily good match. A real mixed bag of a show. Mostly everything is worth a peek, just make sure you switch off before World War III breaks out. Number 3, Fall Brawl. The first pay-per-view of the Monday Night War era, Fall Brawl 95 was, as usual, about war games. Sadly, this was 1995 WCW, so War Games was now a pale PG imitation of what was once a bloody and brutal way to settle scores. In a cartoonish main event, the Camouflage Squad of Hogan, Savage, Sting and Luger predictably beat the Dungeon of Doom contingent of the Shark, the Zodiac, Kamala and Meng. Entertaining enough nonsense, it was followed by a match come angle with Hogan taking on Kevin Sullivan only to be attacked by the Giant. Jerking the curtain were Brian Pillman and Johnny B. Bad, with a future shot at the United States Championship on the line. Booked to go 30 minutes, supposedly because somebody backstage thought it would expose both men, they well and truly proved the naysayers wrong with a tremendous match that never felt like its runtime. Perhaps Mark Merrow's finest hour. Well, besides pulling Prime Sable anyway. Craig Pittman squashed the Cobra, whoever the hell that is, okay then. DDP, ever the grifter, did his best to get something watchable out of the Renegade and snagged the TV title in the process. Harlem Heat retained their tag gold in an arbitrary match against Slater and Bunk. It did not need 16 minutes to accomplish what it set out to, let me tell you. And Arn Anderson beat Ric Flair in a 20+ minute minor classic that serves as a prime example of what these two legends were all about. Number 2, the Great American Bash. The Great American Bash concept was revived after a 2-year hiatus, much to the delight of patriotic wrestling fans. As a show, the 95 Bash was solid if not spectacular. It certainly had an enthralling main event as Ric Flair took on Randy Savage. As I said earlier, you've seen them square off on countless occasions, but it's always at the very least a good time. This though was more than that, with tons of intensity and some unintentional blood adding to the drama. The headliner was fittingly the best match of the night, but that's not to say there weren't highlights elsewhere. Like in the opening contest between Alex Wright and Brian Pillman, which told a good story and built nicely during the course of its 15-minute runtime. An arm wrestling match between DDP and Dave Sullivan was pure storyline stuff, and at least watching Dave Sullivan arm wrestle meant that we didn't have to see him actually wrestle. Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Sergeant Craig Pittman were never gonna have a barn burner, were they? And guess what? They didn't. I love it when things go exactly as you think they will, don't you? A tag match between Harlem Heat and Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck didn't set the world on fire, nor did Renegade's TV title victory over Arn Anderson. Yes, they had the Renegade beat Arn Anderson for the TV title, and yes, they gave the match 10 whole minutes, and yes, it was awful. A tag title match between the Nasty Boys and the Blue Bloods picked things up some, even if it was a little longer than it needed to be. And Sting beats Meng in a hard-hitting tournament final match to win the vacant US title. Number 1, Starrcade. Saving their best until last, WCW ended the year on pay-per-view on a high with Starrcade. Most of the show was taken up by a 7-match tournament between wrestlers from WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Jushin Liger gained the advantage for his promotion by beating Chris Benoit in a sterling opener. Koji Kanemoto extended that advantage by besting Alex Wright in another good one. Lex Luger then pulled one back for WCW by beating Masahiro Chono, with Johnny B. Bad tying things up with a DQ victory over Masa Saito. Shinjiro Otani got the better of Eddie Guerrero in an engrossing contest that blended mat work, stiff strikes, and high flying. There wasn't much of that on display when Savage beat Tenzan to make it 3-3, but it wasn't a chore to watch or anything. And then it was up to Sting to put away Kensuke Sasaki and make it 4-3 in favor of WCW. The Stinger's night was not over, however, as both he and Luger then had to wrestle a triple threat match with Ric Flair, with the winner receiving a WCW World title match immediately after. Triple threat matches were still in their infancy at this point, so it must have been hard to piece together, but this had flashes of greatness and told a couple of different stories well. However, at half an hour long, it definitely could have had 10 minutes cut from the runtime. In any event, Flair prevailed and then took the title from Macho Man in a match that was a little on the short side, though both men had wrestled already and had an overbooked finish. A weird year with the company trying to figure out what they wanted to be and searching for a proper identity as they went to war with the Fed. Things would only get better in 1996.